Thank you for being here, and welcome to the first presentation of SPLICE. This is a regular daily occurrence. There will be a presentation or of some kind in here today, tomorrow, up to Thursday. So come back here every day at 5. And today, we have the honor of welcoming Nick Zoulek, who is... Many of you have already interacted with him, and if you haven't yet, you should. He's an awesome dude, an amazing musician. So I'm going to tell you just a little bit about him, and then I'll get out of the way. He's coming to us from Chicago. He did his undergrad at the University of Wisconsin-Whitewater. Then he went to Paris, where he studied avant-garde repertoire with Jean-Michel Goury. Okay. And improvisation with the bassist Joël Leandre. Amazing people both. Then he got his DMA from Bowling Green. Some of you are familiar with that place. And as a performer, he has commissioned and premiered over 100 works for the saxophone, but these days he's much more known and active in his writing his own music. So you will undoubtedly be hearing about that shortly. He just came out with his second album. His first album was called Rushing Past Willow, and his second album, Enter Branch, was released in, August 25? So hot off the presses. It's an amazing album. Highly recommend you check it out. Just as an aside, I've known this guy for we can't even figure out how long. We probably met in 2008. So it predates my knowing actually many of the faculty here at SPLICE, which is crazy to think about. And we ran into each other in Paris he was performing my piece in Paris when I was there. It was amazing. So anyway, that's just a little bit about the history, and now I will turn it over to the amazing Nick Zoulek.
Thank you all so much. It really is an honor to be here and to be interacting with all of you. And yeah, like Per said, it's, I don't know, with Per, it's crazy. It has been almost 20 years.
I know.
That's crazy. Wild. But then everyone in the SPLICE faculty, I think there's just different ways we've intertwined and all kinds of different walks of life. So to have all of that converging here is a special thing. I'm honored to be talking to you today about my artistic practice, and I kind of want to talk about it through the lens of my most recent project called Enter Branch. So I was playing a little bit of it as folks were coming in. Thought I'd just play a little bit more, and then we'll keep it going. So we'll get to more of that, but I wanted to start with that just as an introduction to some of the sounds that I work with, but I really want to tell you where those sounds come from and my personal approach to the instrument and how those things come together. Just before this, it was an honor to have this improvisation composer workshop with some of you all, and in that workshop, we were talking about reframing our relationship with an instrument or with a sound-making device. This is something that's really important to me. I like to view my relationship with the saxophone as, I see it as a sort of biofeedback machine, and that's somewhat borrowed from a saxophonist who I really admire, Evan Parker, but I think there's a lot of truth to it. So when I'm talking about the instrument as a biofeedback machine, I think an easy way to visualize it is to break it down into a system of the vocal track, the reed, and the bore of the instrument, and how acoustic impedance is formed within that conical bore, right? The reed is vibrating, yet there's back pressure that you feel in your body, and when you extend your performance through, in my case, circular breathing, or say you add other pitch material by vibrating your vocal cords while playing, when you access techniques like multiphonics and all of that, I find that rather than trying to control and harness every aspect of the instrument, instead I view it more like surfing or something, right? You don't get to choose the wave that you're riding, but you do ride it, and through that interaction, I find that to just be constantly inspiring. Along with that, I'm a saxophonist. My degrees are in saxophone performance. I compose. I'm also an audio engineer and videographer. And from the audio engineering side, I really feel that as soon as the sound of our instrument hits a microphone, it's fundamentally changed. And I think there are ways that sounds can function within specific mediums that might reach an audience or might convey meaning more effectively depending on the medium. So when I record, I'm often trying to capture, the saxophone sound radiates from everywhere on the instrument. It's not just from the bell, right? As we open keys, sound is radiating from those. It's really in all directions. So what I'll often do is write pieces that are meant to be recorded with a specific microphone setup to capture specific auditory phenomenon, and then mix that in a way to create more of like a sonic landscape rather than just a capture of the instrument. So along with that, just the idea and study of perception and our relationship to instruments is fascinating to me. On a more just surface level, one of the first books that I read that really flipped my understanding with this was by the bass player Victor Wooten, The Music Lesson, and it's within that book he's really kind of personifying his relationship with both his instrument and his practice, and it's this sort of dialogue. It's a lovely read, and I'd recommend it. But I think that was this first step to redefining just how I approach the instrument, not as something that I need to, control all the time, but something that is more of a harmonious relationship. But that extended further. While I was in Paris, just trying to learn more about the culture, I found more, especially in philosophy. Maurice Merleau-Ponty was important to me, and he would fall into phenomenology, right? Understanding perception and just the phenomena of life and how we relate to it. From there, I became really fascinated with things like auditory scene analysis, how we perceive sounds within a space, which aspects are selective, which aren't. And I wanted to incorporate that into not just my performance, but how those sounds live, in streaming media, how it lives on albums, how it lives accompanying visual media, that sort of thing. So just to break it down a bit more, this whole idea of biofeedback mechanisms, one track from Enter Branch where I really tried to augment this, capture it, and then have it displayed in different ways. It's a track called Vision. And it was, I'll talk about this more tomorrow night in the concert, but I've been really fascinated with preparing and extending the saxophone, probably since Per and I would have met. That was back in when I was doing a lot of dance accompaniment. But as I was bringing together repertoire for Enter Branch, this one piece was sort of looking forward to another project that's entirely tube stuff, but it felt like it was part of Enter Branch. I'm going to play just a little clip so you can see what I'm saying with trying to capture all of these different aspects of the biofeedback mechanism. So in this piece, I would consider my respiratory system to be the actuator, right? The reed is causing vibration. The body of the instrument is resonating. And what I wanted to really show was, the bore of that instrument with the camera inside the saxophone. I had cameras for this particular recording in my mouth too, to show the different shapes that are happening. And in the end though, having that tube extension is, I almost view the fingering patterns on the saxophone as like a step sequencer in this. And quite frankly, this piece is one of the most basic patterns that you could make with that step sequencer. But what you get are these different acoustic phenomena, and it's quite fascinating, especially on the bass saxophone, right? As it's opening up in a cone, as you're closing down certain keys, but those interact with other aspects of the instrument. I just find it to be such a rewarding experience. But along with that, the microphone placement on the saxophone itself really acts as yet another extension of the instrument. As you extend the horn, it's not like lowering the whole pitch. It's not like the fingering system is entirely the same. As you get longer with it, the pitch does lower, but also the range of the instrument condenses. And vents that otherwise would be used for octave mechanisms or for trill keys tend to create other, auditory phenomenon. And I like to capture those pretty specifically. I want to talk a little bit about some of the influences that are important to me. And by no means is this a comprehensive list or anything like that, but I want to really focus in on this side. I've been passionate about this for a huge portion of my academic career, but I will admit I never brought it together as a comprehensive document or anything like that. But the saxophone is still a young instrument, right? It was invented in so the first patents are in the 1840s, 1850s, that area. If you don't know, it was a huge function of it at first was within the French military, kind of replacing clarinets, or the idea was one saxophone could, replace 3 clarinets or something like that. So budget cuts led to the saxophone, right? But that's interesting to me too, because it is, it's an instrument that was invented, and it is, I feel, very much a product of the Industrial Revolution. And even just thinking about the makeup of it, it's a very mechanical instrument, right? It's a machine. But along with that age, it's interesting to consider how instruments evolve and how an instrument finds an idiomatic voice as it exists. We've seen the saxophone used in marching band, of course, the associations with jazz, these certain splits into classical jazz popular idioms, but I've been fascinated with what I like to call the saxophone continuum movement, which for me there's different origin points. If you wanted to really dive back, it goes back to like the 1920s with saxophonists like Rudy Wiedoff, Benny Kruger, who were taking effects that might be considered novel, like circular breathing, like double tonguing, like slap tonguing, and incorporating that into their performance. I find that those novel effects continued to have a voice with the instrument, but as we get to more of, like John Coltrane, like, late 1950s and 60s, I think the craftsmanship or the virtuosity, whatever you want to call it, on the saxophone had continued to develop. Of course, the instrument had developed, so we were ergonomically able to play better. But there were also, I think, like themes and attempts to just find like what is the saxophone sound. So like if you listen to John Coltrane, you've probably heard of this analogy of like waves of sound, right? These long continuous things. For me, it's fascinating to consider other facets of the saxophone's development around the world, and sometimes these musicians were aware of each other, sometimes they were not. But for me, like with some of these saxophonists, so like with John Coltrane, I think there was a question of what happens when a performer pushes continuous flow, and then with people like Roscoe Mitchell, Anthony Braxton, of course this is related more to like the AACM and things like that, but there was also this question of what happens when timbre becomes form, what happens when the solo performer becomes their own ecosystem. I think that continues with people like Evan Parker. How does circular breathing and uninterrupted musicality function within this instrument? And all of these people, I'll tell you this too from, really from like middle school and high school. So I grew up just outside of Milwaukee. There was not a lot of ability to like play saxophone with piano, right? And you played it in band, and then there's this question like, well, what else am I supposed to do with this thing? I was thankful to have a teacher who really encouraged free improvisation at the end of every lesson. And he also would give me tons and tons of CDs which had a lot of these folks on it. And especially from a young age, I can remember like Joshua Redman, who's a jazz great. He'd do these unaccompanied intros on tenor saxophone, and I was just floored by the fact that you could create an entire sonic ecosystem just on your own. But at the same time, I grew up making skate videos, watching skate videos and all of that, which led to a lot more of like these kinds of sounds, which mean a whole lot to me. I was just talking about this earlier with the last group I was working with. I really, my time in Paris, I loved studying with Jean-Michel. He was always very encouraging of this idea of, like, well, while I was in Paris, a goal of mine was to always have solo programs ready to go, like at the drop of a hat. If someone was like, you gotta play a full solo recital tomorrow, I wanted to be ready to do that, and I wanted to have it like all memorized. I don't know, I just thought that was a cool thing. But what that turned into was more of like developing my own repertoire and creating these long narratives. He was encouraging of that. But also, Joel, I can remember the first times I played these like overtone extended pieces, and normally Joelle, when she's giving critique or comments, it turns out to be these, some people speak in sentences, other people speak in paragraphs, and but in this moment, she was like, well, that's it. That's what you need to do. You found it, and that was a really important thing. So I'm very grateful for her mentorship. But again, I just want to emphasize, I think it's interesting in the saxophone's trajectory, like how the instrument is continuing to find a sonic identity. I listed on that last slide people like Colin Stetson, like Bendik Giske, how these sounds have reached a wider audience and are more associated with the saxophone. I do remember back in high school, I always went to get haircuts from this one person. I had hair at that point. But she knew I played saxophone, and I was really into the circular breathing thing, and I remember saying that, and she was like, oh, like Kenny G. It was always like circular breathing like Kenny G, and I was like, yeah, not really, but I get it. Anyway, fast forward now, I have plenty of I don't know, I remember like just a year ago giving this workshop to a bunch of like middle school and high school saxophonists, and they all knew like what circular breathing on the saxophone sounded like, and I think that's a really beautiful thing. I don't know. But from that saxophone continuum, language or lineage or whatever you want to call it, I think these are the questions that I think it asks and that are interesting to me. I'll give you a second, you can read it. And I think they're important questions, both in the development of the saxophone, but also in 2026 I'm excited to hear this panel on AI and music. Is that tomorrow or 2 days from now?
Wednesday.
Thank you. I'm excited to hear that. I'm considering that when I'm thinking about these questions too, like what does it mean to be interacting with an acoustic instrument, right? What does it mean then when we're transferring that to the digital medium? And how do those things live in those spaces in a unique and artistic manner? When I was first asked to come here, we talked a lot about trying to convey something with the performer-composer identity. And it's so interesting in I think the conservatory system, especially in the US, there is that divide, right, between performing and composing, and it's kind of funny how that came about, because it certainly hasn't always been the case that those were divided, right? There are so many instances throughout history where, no, it's like one and the same. But nonetheless, for me, composing first was really associated with jazz and jazz saxophone playing. In my undergrad, I was there on jazz scholarships, but all along the way people were like, you should do this contemporary classical thing. I think you're gonna like that. And I did. For me, being in Paris, seeing improvisation through a lens where like jazz was part of the improvisation pie rather than the other way around, right? Like sometimes I feel in American pedagogy, if you're improvising, you're studying, it's from studying jazz. There's not always studying improvisation as its own thing. And that's kind of, I don't know, I think that's a interesting American sort of thing, right? Jazz is so integrated in our culture, but so many other cultures and other musics are so based in improvisation. I don't know. I was very happy to have those experiences abroad, and but for me it led to this idea of finding a unified, artistic voice that brought together my musical interests, my work as an audio engineer, and my work as a videographer. So, one of the first projects where I was able to really bring all of this stuff together was an album called Rushing Past Willow that I put out in 2016. It was an entirely solo album where I was putting a lot of these ideas about miking, the saxophone, recording, all of the different vents and all of that. It was kind of a first attempt with that. But along with that, there were these main questions. So from the skating background and everything, concept albums are a huge thing for me. Love the concept album, right? So then the question was, what if like the concept album is the form? I think this is something that a lot of people do now, but it was an important one for me. But more importantly, it was, what if this was kind of a pre-biofeedback thing, but what if physicality and that relationship from the instrument is generating the material? That's really where like the circular breathing, like why it's so crucial to the practice, right? I will say that whether improvising and circular breathing or doing these written pieces that are extended, like the way that you focus and yet enter kind of a flow sort of state, it's a phenomenon that I really appreciate. But also, for me, there was always a question of how does the audio and video change a composition or compositional process. Tomorrow night we'll see like some dance films that I've created and things like that. And the processes were all intertwined, right? Like I was being informed by working with dancers and creating that film as I was still writing the piece, and the thing sort of, I don't know, it's just interesting how processes can be different. But then finally, this question of what happens when the performer, composer, engineer, filmmaker, when it's all the same person. And I think that's an interesting question, especially in 2026. I think like culturally, it's almost encouraged, right? Like, and I think there's pros and cons to that. I'll get more into that later, but just to touch on it, for example, I think even like Apple Music or Spotify, there's this idea of like, oh yeah, you can go and produce this stuff and upload it yourself, and then you're gonna promote it on Instagram, and you can do all this stuff, kid, have at it. But then, like a book that I really appreciate is called Mood Machine by Liz Pelly. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. And it just talks about the rise of Spotify, and it kind of equates that exact paradigm to like payola schemes of like the radio music era, where Spotify, like, yes, they're encouraging you as an individual composer, performer, whatever, to put this stuff out, but at the same time they're saying you should pay us to market your music, and we're going to ask subscribers to pay for this, and we're going to generate money off of ad revenue, and we're collecting your data. Like, so I don't know. I bring that up because I'm so torn on it, and I'm sure I'm not alone on this. It is incredible what we can do and how many tools we have to create music. But I think it's just important to consider it in a wider ecosystem. Pivoting back. So Rushing Past Willow, I put that out in 2016, and it did feel like a statement of this vocabulary on the saxophone, right? That comes from the lineage that I was outlining, and hopefully accesses some different areas. When I was writing it, I felt like, okay, this is maybe a one-off sort of thing, but as soon as I was done, it's like, nah, I got a lot more in me. Let's keep going. But one of the biggest things I wanted to accomplish with Enter Branch was to connect these sounds with voices that aren't always definitely not in the classical saxophone tradition, and sometimes not even in the classical tradition. And I wanted it to be with voices who inspired me with the ways that they reach different communities, you know. So across the album, there are collaborations. I had them listed before, but I'll play some more with that. But all of the people on the album are, I don't know, I just think to stay inspired, you gotta surround yourself by inspiring people, right? And I don't know, I'm grateful that they're all on the album. We'll listen to more in just a bit. So while creating Enter Branch, then, I wanted to elaborate more on this concept album as form, and I wanted to create a track list that was both a unified journey, but still was true to the different artistic practices of all of the collaborators, and still hit on this saxophone language and development. Throughout the album, you do hear these motifs coming through, repeating over and over. I think in the end, with all of the collaborators, the theme that just kept coming up was always growth. There are things for me that it meant, there are different things for each of the collaborators that it meant. But in the end, it's this idea of growth and perhaps new ideas of how to connect with community. A term that I used to really love, and then tech bros kind of took it over and I don't like it, this post-humanism idea. And what that means, it's not like after humans, right? It's what is the human experience beyond the individual? And the reason that tech bros took it over is because, you know, we think about how far our reach can be, how quickly we can learn information, right? We think about how communities can form across physical space, across time, and because of that, I do think we grow, humanity grows from it, right? As long as tech bros don't monetize every aspect of it or something. But it was something I really leaned into and was inspired by while creating this project. I think I want to just play some for you. So the first track that I want to play is by Jay Ivey, who's a poet and spoken word artist based in Chicago. So in this particular situation, I mean, has anyone seen Jay perform ever? Anyone familiar? He's phenomenal. And I was very honored to meet him and learn about his artistry, but he's also an author. And I heard him give this talk on a book he had just written that's about his relationship with his father, in his case having grown up on the south side of Chicago. And I'm going to paraphrase, but I hope I don't butcher it. In Jay's case, you know, his dad was actually a radio personality, but wasn't super present in his life. And he talks about how difficult it was, like he was looking for that kind of figure in his life, and everyone around him knew who his dad was, but his dad was only like a voice on the radio for him. And of course that's a journey I can never know personally, but man, was it moving. So anyway, as I was working on this project, I talked about things where we just connected on this idea of growth. And it led to this track called Organic.
space merely make believe. We make our futures based on what we see. Who cluttered your heart? Studied the parts that speak to your soul. Oh, me? Well, my grave is a cave where I think I can't be saved. Frigid and frustrated, lost in the now, lost in the how, conscious, unconcentrated, every failure contemplated as if setback wasn't a win, every lesson taken on the chin leads to growth, every breath taken feeds on hope, the scope of change isn't always so clear, I ear candles so I can wax poetic what I hear. Smear my genius on the canvas, blues and greens. I choose to keep it organic, homegrown. Sometimes courage is needed when we panic, when we're home alone. Gone, high gone from every stone thrown. Kick rocks, aim higher. Habitually we claim tired. Life is a chain of choices. Claim your fire, walk the wire, don't be distracted by the voices. Fix yourself, Tony, fix yourself. Health is wealth. Steer the ship. Keep it steady. Take a load off. The road is the road. That don't mean it have to be heavy. It don't have to be heavy. Breathe. Breathe.
Man, Jay's great. Yeah, working with him was a true honor. Yeah, but you know, when I think about the narrative arc again, what it means for me, and different the challenges that we encounter and trying to overcome it, I don't know. That's a driving factor for me. I've talked a lot about like the traditions going into the album. I've talked about the collaborators. I should probably just tell you what it's about for me. I wrote the project over a period of 8 years, and I had some huge just worldview changes throughout that time. And one of the biggest struggles, I think, so I was raised like Catholic, and then that same saxophone teacher who was really encouraging of free improvisation. There was also this weird thing where he was very heavy into like born again Christianity stuff, and along with free improvisation, he would like really push that, and that's a really hard thing as a young impressionable kid, right? But then going into like undergrad, thankfully there were like great biology classes and things like that shifted a worldview, and I think shifted for me like a relationship just with those things that were really critical to how I was raised. But I don't know. There's sometimes we have to reconsider what like beliefs. We have to grow beyond that. Sometimes things that served us at one point don't serve us any longer, right? So throughout this album, I tried to reference these. I don't know. It's a lot of like plagal cadences, religious overtones, and things like that. And I do think in some ways it shows this process of growth over. I mean, probably starting from my 20s and through my 30s, and just a change in that worldview, but one that I'm really grateful for and very happy to have experienced. to leave a few minutes to talk if there's any questions or anything like that. But before we do, I just wanted to say thank you one more time to SPLICE, to everyone here, and to all of you for listening, for being so open to all of that. I put this thing out in August, but I actually haven't had a chance to really talk about it. And I am so honored to share that with this community, with the community of such awesome people. So thank you all, really. Happy to answer any questions with a couple minutes. Hey, Bill.
Hi. So you specifically mentioned social media, Spotify, Instagram by name, et cetera, right? I'm curious, so I follow you on Instagram. You have 15,000 followers, which is pretty impressive for new music, saxophone type person. And I say that because you put in effort to that account, right? Like you can see, and in fact, I think I didn't search for you. I got served a reel and I went, oh shit, and it was awesome, right? Because you make really good content for that. So all caveats of social media and its problems aside, right? Because we're all kind of in this race together. I'm just curious, especially with how polished it is and how much time you put into it, how important is that to you as an artist in today's landscape? And like, what sort of a percentage, maybe arbitrarily, do you put towards that sort of platform, given that we're all, you know, trying to fight for that same pie?
Yeah, I'm really grateful for that question. So, you know, my life is performing, composing, and then I run a media business. And I pretty exclusively work with contemporary classical musicians. And sometimes that's one-off content. Other times we're having much larger questions about like visual branding and things like that. And quite honestly, that comes from my background in just working with different nonprofits, working with things or with concepts like development, strategic planning, and all of that. What I like to do in my own practice is use my work as research for other stuff. And my hope is that it can help other people get their stuff out there. So there's a couple reasons and motivators for me to put that out there, but I will say this: I do think the way that people consume media has changed, right? I don't even know if we can really argue that point, and it's continuously changing. I will say it is very hard and frustrating as someone who likes long-form minimalist composition to then trim it down to 8 seconds or whatever it is. But at the same time, I think about that trajectory I was talking about with the saxophone and integrating it into a community. And that's something I've been passionate about throughout my academic career. And that is probably the biggest like personal reason for me to like keep pushing that out there. I'm happy that I can use skills that were a part of me from like making goofy skate videos and putting them out to now, you know, for whatever reason, get the saxophone to reach new ears and all of that. But yeah, that's what keeps me going with that.
I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your approach to narrative and how you are using electronics and extensions of your instrument. And I hear of an approach to narrative that I find really attractive and that I don't hear particularly often in electroacoustic music. And I just wonder if you could talk a little bit about how you think about building narrative across an album or across a large scale work.
Yeah, for me, I draw from my visual practice a lot with that, and more so the process of like storyboarding and concept boarding, like understanding how visuals will connect to one another. I do sometimes write out the story and what that is for me, but very purposefully I try to keep that for me, because I don't even know if that's the most important part of the music. Like in some ways I feel like once it's out, it's someone else's, but I do hope that it still comes across that there is like a narrative arc. So in terms of like actual practice, again, like storyboarding, concept art, all of that kind of stuff, that's things that you could do in like, if you make comics or something like that, that same kind of practice, but then applying that in the abstract to my saxophone work. Yeah.
You mentioned post-humanism in your talk. I was wondering if there are particular authors or artists that you're inspired by who have worked in that domain. I am particularly inspired by the cyborg.
Yeah, uh-huh.
Yeah, I was wondering.
Exactly that, and I mean, that goes deep, and I apologize, I'm not always great with names. But for me, from like the more musicology standpoint, it's people like Lawrence Kramer and all of that who are talking about musical communities that are forming across different boundaries and like genres that then represent a community with that. Honestly, again, pulling from Liz Pelly, I especially like points that she brings up about, you know, for example, like the whole, like the lo-fi community, the hyper pop community, and how these things formed with very specific people in mind, but then the danger of how that can be monetized and almost, what does she call it, like the beigification of a genre, right? Because then it's commercialized, people understand it's a sound that they can replicate, and you kind of lose these connections of small niche communities. I'm like dropping on names and everything, but those are the concepts that keep me coming back to.
Adding to that a little bit, you mentioned a couple of inspirations of yours that are outside of classical or like contemporary music. Björk, Bonnie Bear, like a couple. How would you, like as a artist, as you know, new music, classical artist in today's world, how do you find that you're able to draw parallels from those outside of the genre, like artists outside of the genre, into your own work and your own creative vision of writing?
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you caught the Boney Bear thing, and being from Wisconsin, like Justin Vernon just holds a different place in your heart when you're from Wisconsin. But what was really interesting to me, especially with like early Boney Bear, was how much that whole crew was, and Sean as well, you know, how much they are searching outside of their genre, and not just trying to bring things in, but authentically make music with their identity being informed by that. And I just figure if they can do it, we should probably do it too. I don't know. I don't know if that's a great answer, but yeah.
Hey, so a lady actually showed me your work when I was at BG. I'm Dan.
Hey Dan, I thought so. Yeah, we've talked a lot. Hey.
Yeah. I actually, the first time I heard you, the first thing I thought was Evan Parker's Monasteries.
Oh yeah.
And I got into that actually through the Run Less Winter Time, which is clarinet.
Oh yeah.
But I was like, oh, he's doing like a version of that, but with like obviously completely different, but the same kind of like non-stop. You know, at least at that point when I saw it was like continuous. Can you kind of like say how like when you heard that and then like how you like learned to do it? Like what was the journey just with that? Because maybe that can help. How you brought in outside things like Meshuggah or other stuff.
Yeah.
Maybe that's just like as an example, like the continuous sort of relentless non-stop, especially like Monasteries, which is cut straight to record.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. So I'll do my best.
Yeah.
So I think one parallel, say, between Evan Parker and like Meshuggah with the patterns. Side note, with saxophone continuum in general, it is, I do feel it's often this like approach to the fingering system as more of like a step sequencer rather than, you know, scales or something like that. And even with the individuals who I listed there, others who are outside, one of the most beautiful things that I find is that there's like an oral tradition being passed from musician to musician, and it's maybe the step sequencer approach, but the beauty that you find in the small differences, the individuality that you find in it is really inspiring to me. However, with that nature of like the step sequencer thing, I think there's often these like implied complex meters or things that come just from the fact that it is like a step sequence, right? And for me, there's this like barrage of sound from the saxophone that's enticing. And when I think of like Meshuggah, it's just larger. But for me, those other influences are what led me to want to expand from just the acoustic performance into something that's either amplified or exists in a different way on an album, or just, you know, leaning into the fact that the piece can exist acoustically, and that's one thing. It can exist with amplification, that's another thing. It can exist in all of these different ways, and it's meant to do that. But anyway, the more important thing I think is, again, like that sequencer aspect, the implied like meter and how that comes, and this idea of like the barrage of sound.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I want to go back to the point of building shared auditory spaces and connecting with a community when you work. I was wondering, for example, for this album, what collaborating style did you use for this so that it connects with the community and have their distinct artistic identities? Like, do you like be a leader and extract things from people, or is it like more of a very round table style of collaborating, or have you tried like a variety of different collaborating styles?
It is a variety, but the one that happens the least is me being the leader. I want them to be them as authentically as possible, and if anything, I'm just a vessel. I try to explain this stuff, and sometimes that helps, but other times it's just like, yeah, it's whatever, let's just make some music together and see what happens. And I think that's, so if anything, if there is like a collaborative style, it's usually like friendship is the guy. That sounds so corny, but it's true. That bond across everything, and you know, approaching spaces that I might not be familiar with the most open and respectful attitude that I can, and realizing that I might not even have the skill set to totally understand what's going on, but I'm going to do my best to understand their artistry and just embrace it, like learn what it is that, just learn more about it. I just like to learn. I think that's about all we have time for, but thank you all again. It's been a real honor.